Welcome to Curious DK. So I was excited when I saw that yesterday's episode of the Joe Rogan Experience had a few mentions of Nostr and NIPS and Damus. And I thought that was really cool and exciting. So I wanted to dig in and see more about how it was being represented. And I've got to say, I was a little bit turned off by how the guest represented it, because I think the guest, his name is Bill Ottman, this episode 1970 of the Joe Rogan Experience. But I think the guest is talking about it to present some affiliation with the principles of Nostr, but I don't feel like he's fully embraced it, because the site that he's running is minds.com, and it's a fairly centralized social network. And some of the stuff he said leads me to believe he doesn't necessarily even really see the architecture of Nostr as super important to the future of how this stuff evolves. So kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, but I wanted to learn more about exactly what it is he's building. And so I looked through his website and some of the claims that they make. And so I share some of that at the end. But first I wanted to turn to some of the clips from the Joe Rogan Experience episode and kind of react to some of that. So here we're going to pull them up.
But what I'm hoping, so we're core developers at, we contributed a what's called a NIP, which is a Nostr Improvement Proposal, which is the framework which could enable a site like Twitter or Rumble or any of them to integrate Nostr like we do. So you don't have to be fully decentralized.
Now, I'm sympathetic to the idea of not being fully decentralized to start. There's some advantages to just being a fully centralized service, and then some amount of progressive decentralization. When Bitcoin was first created, it only really ran on Satoshi's machine for the first, moment. So it wasn't fully decentralized, but it got there. But I think you have to have in mind an architecture or an idea about how you would get there. And I haven't heard anything from him that suggests that that's sort of the path for Minds. In fact, I think he kind of sees centralization as totally fine, outcome, and he believes that actually centralized products will work better.
But you can integrate NIP 26, which is delegated event signing, so that your users have an escape hatch.
So he's talking about a way for users to have an escape hatch, but he's talking about doing it with delegated event signing. So, to sort of distill this, I'd say it sounds like he's saying you need to be able to log in to a centralized service, but then also be able to use maybe delegated keys to log into a centralized service or a decentralized service. But I just don't see, if the data is living and controlled inside a centralized services database, I'm not sure that you've really won much. But let's go on.
And that's really all people want. People are going to keep using Twitter just because a fully decentralized option exists. Doesn't mean people are going to stop using Twitter. And
So I'm not sure that I fully agree here. I would strongly disagree with this. I think the main thing is that Twitter has some real scale today, and a service like Nostr, which is a protocol, not a platform, is very small, and it's very early. And so people who are using Nostr, many times they're not using Twitter. Instead, they're broadcasting those same ideas they would have used Twitter for, but they're using Nostr instead. And so those ideas are alive and well on Nostr, but they're not looking to also move back and use centralized services. And I think the idea that nobody's really going to use these decentralized services is kind of a tell that he doesn't seem to really care that much about the principles here.
I feel like that's kind of what Elon has in his head, because Nostr was on remember when a couple months ago, Twitter came out with this policy, we're banning links to Instagram, Facebook, and Mastodon, and then they rolled it back. Do you remember that?
I don't.
So they did do that, and people were bugging out,
Of course.
And so they rolled back the policy. They said, okay, we're not going to do that. Nostr was actually on that list. So they're aware of this system, but I think that they're thinking about it the wrong way, because the there's a fully pure Nostr client called Damus, which is super nice, and it's a great option. But fully decentralized options don't have a ton of functionality.
Now, I would take issue with this. I think fully decentralized options don't have a ton of functionality. It may just be like a moment in time or a snapshot of where we are right now. This idea of what Nostr can enable is fairly new. Even having workable functional systems today, I think, is a pretty good achievement. But one of the main things is we have enough galvanized social consensus that people come to Nostr every day. I'm one of them. I use it every day. And I use it and I discuss things that I don't discuss anywhere else. I don't discuss on Twitter. And so I think to say that that they have to be inferior is wrong. I would take strong issue with that. I think they may tend to be inferior at the moment because they're earlier in their development. And part of the kind of benefits but challenges with decentralization is that nobody controls it, so anybody can do whatever they want. And so if you want to, say, move as fast as possible in a very specific direction, a centralized org with a CEO who marshals resources, capital, and talent can achieve more in a single central direction than a decentralized protocol will make in that single direction. That's true. But the beauty of the decentralized approach, which Nostr embraces, is that once you get the ball rolling, anybody who wants can contribute whatever they want. And so you actually harder to get started, but you get more functionality because it's anybody who has a good idea can contribute it and see what takes off instead of needing to have a centralized org think through and prioritize resources about which features are going to be developed when. So I think the claim that he makes, I'd say, is just patently false here.
But they don't have the notifications.
Now he says they don't have the notifications, but I just got notifications on Damus today. So I think they've been around for a few weeks. So maybe, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say, maybe this was recorded a few weeks before we had notifications, but it's just not like some impossibility to build such features. Now, they do have some different axes of centralization when you choose to do that, but the accounts are not centralized. The data is not centralized. The notifications may get pushed from a single centralized client, but that's just kind of like to improve the UX without compromising on the foundational ideals.
They don't have a lot of the discoverability of stuff.
So it's true. Damus in particular has chosen to not include a lot of discoverability so far. I think at Nostrika, I heard Will talking about wanting to include some discoverability providers. I think if I understand right, they don't want to build it themselves, but they did want to work with a bunch of different people who might be building discoverability features. There's other clients like, I think between like Snort, Iris, Primal, Current, I think several of them, maybe all of them, but definitely several of them include discoverability features. Again, those are paired with that client, but once you've discovered the person, you've chosen to follow them, you can take those keys that have the same following, you move them to any client. So these are not really like centralization risks, but they are features that can be built around these decentralized principles, but they are fundamentally still allow for the decentralization, which is you control your keys, you control the data where it gets stored, you control the graph of followers.
There's serious limitations with fully decentralized stuff that's never going to be able to compete with more of like a centralized option where you can do all this fancy.
Now, I think he's just talking his own book here. I don't think that decentralized things can never achieve what centralized things can. I think quite the opposite. Decentralized things can achieve a whole lot more. And it's just, I think, a matter of time and contribution and attention from developers to decide what to build when. In a centralized org, if you know the one thing you want to build and you've got the CEO marshaling resources, you can go after that one thing really well. So I would agree with him that you can get execution on a centralized hypothesis and a product vision faster with a centralized org. But that doesn't mean that decentralized approaches cannot achieve even more. It just means that they might take a little bit longer to get started, but then once they get started and rolling, it's, things can go in a lot of different directions that the centralized versions don't. So you look at like the evolution, the different flavors we have of Linux compared to Windows. It's just a great example, tons of different contributions from all over the place. So I think you actually can get much better products in a decentralized open source way, but it doesn't really fit with the narrative that he's trying to share, which is that sort of centralized approaches to the main clients are better.
Data processing and whatnot. So I think that this idea that we need to push out decentralized competitors is really just like the wrong state. Like if Elon repeatedly says like we need to maximize public trust, and I do believe that he believes that and wants that. And
I'm not sure that I believe that it's maximizing public trust. I think there's a lot going on at Twitter today that is challenging to the business. And I think, things like disabling Substack links or, tweets that have Substack links is not geared toward enabling more public trust, but it's aimed at keeping the business objectives of Twitter as a centralized org in check. So, I know they rolled that back, which, I would applaud their choice to roll it back, but I would also question why are they making such a choice in the first place? It feels like it's a little bit of a haphazard, ham-fisted decision.
And that's why he's trying to be more transparent. But maximizing public trust is about, give people their own keys. And then, that's going to hold the company accountable. And then if, Twitter messes around, they can go pop over someone else. But
see, this misses, though, if you have your own keys and you can pop over somewhere else. But if all the data is stored in Twitter's database or all the data is stored in Mind's database, and those keys don't really enable you to access that data, then I don't know that you've won much. I think you have like a nice narrative that you can spin that says, hey, look, we're decentralized. You have your own keys. You can go anywhere you want. But it's like you can go anywhere you want. But if your data is not there, if the people you want to interact with are not there, you haven't really gained much.
They don't lose all their stuff.
They do.
But how would you possibly move Twitter stuff to some other network, though?
So Rogan's asking the right question here. How do you move Twitter stuff? Well, it's the data is what matters. It's not just the account.
Because if they
let's say if someone did something like that, and you had all your posts on Twitter, you've been on Twitter since 2009, and Minds gives you the ability to port your shit over to there. How the fuck would you ever wind up doing that?
I mean, if it gets integrated, then all the posts can just be signed.
So it depends on what level of integration. He's talking now about posts being signed. So that sounds a little bit closer to, a recognition of the Nostr architecture. But if you're talking about posts being signed, before he's talking about delegated keys and taking your keys and logging into a different place. If you're talking about posts being signed, I wonder if he actually is really talking about posts being signed and pushed to relays, which then means you're really changing the architecture of Twitter or really reinventing the architecture of a centralized service like Twitter or Minds in order to achieve it. It's not just having key delegation supported.
And
if it gets integrated.
Yeah,
but that seems like that would be very beneficial to Minds, but not very beneficial to Twitter.
And I think Rogan's calling him out appropriately, which is it's beneficial to Minds because Minds is another centralized service that doesn't have access to those posts, but would like access to those posts. So if you're Twitter, I think the best choice would be to just be a Nostr client and push all of that data into relays and build a different business, maybe a bigger one than you can build as a centralized provider. Minds is a centralized provider that has very little scale, and so they're trying to sort of replay the problems of Twitter, kind of new boss, same as the old boss, but with a slightly different perspective, not really a different architecture, and not really creating more freedom.
Because at the end of the day, Twitter is still a company.
But think about we're a company. I mean,
yeah.
Right, but it would be beneficial to you. You're far smaller.
Right.
Like how many users does Twitter have?
Oh, of course.
Hundreds of millions, right?
Right, but there were people on our team who asked the same question to our team. Why would we give people the ability, why would we let people, they're just going to go take their Mind stuff and go somewhere else.
Exactly. So you really need to rethink this whole thing. It's the architecture really matters. If you've already got an existing service built on a different architecture, you're not going to gain a lot just by having some sort of key delegation, signing in. You really need to be able to empower people to take their stuff elsewhere. Now, in an ecosystem where people are empowered to write their data to these open relays, to read data from open relays, there's all kinds of business opportunities, but they just are not going to look that similar to the social networking opportunities of kind of winner take all, centralized providers, monopolistic tendencies, ad driven experiences that we've seen over the last 15 plus years. So I think he's recognizing, and even his team is recognizing, that they're a centralized provider trying to figure out how to adopt this, but they're a little bit anchored in their history. I think they're not really embracing Nostr from the core principles of what Nostr goes for.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like just us. It's not
right, but you're a very small company, relatively speaking. Like when you first came on the podcast, I think you had 2 million. Is that what it was? Somewhere around there?
Yeah, that sounds right.
And now you're more than double that. You're at 5 million. But relatively speaking, when people start talking about social media networks, Minds does not get into the conversation as a mass, distributor of information.
Right, and now Rumble is.
Yeah.
And do you know why?
So he's kind of deflecting and talking about Rumble now, and then he goes on to talk about how they pay a lot of people to promote it. But he doesn't really address the fact that he's recreating the problems, apparently, of Twitter, but just with his own perspective. And so I thought, I'm obviously excited about Nostr, but I'm open to learning about other things. I don't think that Nostr is the only technology that the world deserves. I think there's lots of new technology approaches. And so I wanted to learn more about Minds. So I went to minds.com, which is the website that he runs, and it's called the community-owned social network. So it has these nice marketing phrases that sound pretty friendly and sound like they might support these same ideals. But I don't see anything about how it works differently. So, all these nice claims of speak your mind, expand your audience, make money, earn crypto rewards, open source and decentralized. There's a lot of the marketing speak here, but you have to visit minds.com. And so there's, the DNS provider has to still recognize you, and you can't be taken down by, if you have a CDN. You have to be responsive to takedown requests of stuff that doesn't necessarily fit in a certain jurisdiction. So, maybe the Chinese government doesn't like what kind of information is being published. Well, they know who to go to. Go to whoever controls the minds.com address. So it feels to me like it's pretty centralized social networking. I don't really understand how it's very different from Twitter, except that it has fewer users. And then I looked here, they have a content policy. So they may have chosen a different content policy than Twitter, but ultimately it's their own, they're creating a jury consisting of 12 randomly selected unique active Minds users. They have a strike system with warnings and blah, blah, blah. They have NSFW content, immediate bans. So they have a different set of centralized decisions than Twitter might be making, but they haven't really moved the decision-making to the edge or moved the decision-making to be decentralized so that lots of different kind of content moderation policies can be enforced, and they could be jurisdictional specific ones, or they could be product or service focused ones. They just kind of are yet another smaller than Twitter version of Twitter. They're not meaningfully decentralized as far as I can tell. And, if I'm wrong about any of this, I'd love to be wrong and learn about that. My goal in reviewing this is not to attack minds.com or the motivations of the founder and CEO that we're hearing from on the Rogan show. But it's really to, if there's something new here, I want to know about it. If there's nothing new here, I want to call it out so that, we don't take this big, this is a big audience channel. A lot of people listen to Rogan. So I think we want to make sure that the story is told clearly and with the principles that Nostr is built on. And so I was then looking around. I noticed earn crypto rewards, which sometimes sets off little spidey senses. There might be something amiss here because it's another centralized provider claiming decentralized. And they're going to have a token, of course. So you go to minds.com/token, and they have a token that fuels the Minds network. You buy tokens to support Minds in your favorite channels. You unlock premium features, blah, blah, blah. So it's a lot of the already explored paths of, can we launch a new token that meaningfully decentralizes this thing? And, launching a token generally makes it less likely that it's decentralized because Minds is the issuer of the token. So I'd be very cautious whenever I see somebody launching a token. And so I said, well, hey, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they invented something better than Bitcoin. If they do, I want to know about it first. So I'm going to go investigate that. And so I went to CoinMarketCap and looked at the mine's currency, and you can see that they had a nice run up while they were hyping and pumping it, but of course it fell off, and it's not the kind of thing you'd want to own, and it doesn't look like that's probably ever going to come back. So, I would still give them the benefit of the doubt. And I was chatting with a little bit with Will on Nostr, and he said that he spent some time with the team when they were writing the NIP 26, and he believes that they want to do the right thing and want to be decentralized. They sort of want to embrace the principles. And so that sounds promising. But the stuff that I heard on the Rogan show kind of sounds sort of like the opposite to me. And so when I hear something that I don't believe is embracing the principles properly, but it's getting wide distribution, I want to call it out so that other people can ask questions too, and we can all learn together. Now, if they have a meaningful way to decentralize this, I want to know about it and I want to promote it. I want to share it because my goal is to help educate more people about how this stuff works and to elevate the stuff that is consistent with these principles, and then to call out things that are trying to associate with these principles without really embracing them or maybe even understanding them at some times. So that was my review, having kind of seen that Nostr is being talked about on the Rogan show. Was exciting. It kind of left a bad taste that I think the person who's representing it may be misrepresenting what it's really all about. But I give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe there's some good in here. Maybe he's going to reinvent his service to be a Nostr client. I'd love to see that. And so let me know what you think. Let me know if you think I got something wrong, or hit me in the comments if you've got something to add to this discussion. Thanks.